What is this? Any ideas? You know it? Okay, please. Absolutely. So this is a closer. We look at submarine cable infrastructure. There, at the time of recording this map, there were around 900,000 kilometers of submarine cables, which means they would lay around Belgium 650 times. The image is an excerpt from the map Anatomy of AI, a project by Kate Crawford and Vladan Joler from 2018, in which they depict the human labor, data, and planetary resources that have gone into the Amazon product, Amazon Echo. These cables have several sheaths around the fiber optic core. Some of these cables, only 1.5 times the width of a garden hose, can transmit 71 million high definition videos at the same time. And they're laid out by large ships, large cable drums, like in this picture. Thanks to this ingenious system, we're now able to send information around the world with a delay of just milliseconds. But why am I telling you this? I am Stefanie Kunkel. I work at the Research Institute for Sustainability, Helmholtz Center Potsdam. And today I would like to talk about the fascination and positive visions of human-made digitalization for sustainability, but of course also will not omit its risks. I will focus on the topic that I am doing research about in my daily work, namely the impact of digitalization on environmental sustainability in industry. Digitalization is a global phenomenon, as the example of the undersea cable shows, and I will try to cover aspects of digital technologies that span across the global south and north. So I won't primarily focus on the global south, but I hope I can cover the expectations of talking a little bit about global south topics. I will also briefly get back to what I think these cables have to do with environmental sustainability. Now, my message today can be summarized as follows. We design digitalization. People design digital technologies. You design digital technologies. In view of the opportunities and major problems that digitalization brings with it, we should neither fall into technology hysteria nor pessimism, but instead make use of the positive design opportunities. I would like to present 3 arguments to you and discuss them with you, hopefully in the end. The first one is digitalization does entail many risks, but because we know about them, I think we can handle them. Sorry, it's too quick. The second, there are many people and organizations around the world that are envisioning very promising applications of digitalization. And the third one, we design digitalization. We're in the right time and place to shape sustainable ICT. I'll start with my first argument. Digitalization does entail many risks, but because we know about them, we can handle them. Augusta Ada Byron, Countess of Lovelace, a mathematician born in England in 1815, was perhaps the first person in the world to start programming. Today, the programming language Ada is named after her. When she started programming, she probably did not imagine that one day people in the Democratic Republic of Congo would come into conflict with the neighboring state of Uganda and cause environmental degradation while mining coltan to produce computers and other digital technologies. I like to think of the effects of digital technologies on environmental sustainability in these 2 categories, direct and indirect environmental effects. I think many of you may be aware of these categories. Now, direct environmental effects, sometimes also referred to as sustainability of digitalization, are the life cycle effects of digital technologies that arise directly from the physical existence of the technology system its production, operation, and end of life. The direct effects include the extraction of raw materials such as coltan. And these raw materials are not only used in our smartphones and laptops, but also in the network infrastructure, as we've seen in the example of the submarine cables mentioned at the beginning. Of course, laying out these cables also has an environmental impact, going with these ships across the ocean. So when we think about the emergence of digital technologies, we should keep the entire digital system, including its underlying infrastructure, in mind. A promising, I would say, typical example of the direct environmental impacts of digital technologies is the end-of-life phase. And according to the Global E-Waste Monitor, only 22% of the global e-waste is actually documented. 82 million kilograms of waste are expected to be generated by 2030. 82 million kilograms. I asked myself, how can I illustrate this? And in fact, this weight corresponds to around 16.4 million elephants, assuming the average weight of an African elephant of 5,000 kilograms. And I thought, okay, 16.4 million elephants, that's still very difficult to imagine. And then I did what everyone does these days. I asked ChatGPT, can you create a picture of 16.4 million elephants? This is what came out of it. ChatGPT said it's difficult to put that many elephants in a picture, but I'll try my best. Of course, I probably shouldn't have used ChatGPT to create this picture because we don't know how much energy this consumes. I mean, maybe you can tell me if it was worth it. The second group of environmental effects are the indirect effects that arise when digital technologies are applied in other economic sectors. These effects are sometimes referred to as sustainability by digitalization, or the version that I prefer, unsustainability by digitalization. Because I'm focusing on the use of digital technologies in industry, I use an example of 3D printing. On the production side, you can say that optimization effects arise when new manufacturing processes are used, such as this additive manufacturing. Materials can be used in other, possibly more efficient ways. But of course, again, the expected savings heavily depend on the underlying assumptions. A study by Cerdas et al. Says that it uses the example of 3D printing of sunglasses versus buying conventional sunglasses and investigate the life cycle emissions. They show that the life cycle emissions of conventional sunglasses are higher than the emissions of 3D printed sunglasses if we assume an average lifetime of 3 years. But if in a hypothetical scenario, I print new sunglasses every month, then the 3D print has 10 times higher emissions than the conventional product. So the bottom line here is that any such optimization effects with regard to material or energy through digital technologies in industry must not be eaten up by overall increase in consumption. And I think I'm telling you no news here. On the consumer side, digital technologies, of course, induce behavioral changes, for example, in online shopping. The World Economic Forum estimates that in a baseline scenario, the number of delivery vehicles required will increase by 36% by 2030 compared to 2019 figures, and the associated emissions by 32%. We could also think of more examples, such as targeted advertisement to make consumers buy more. So I think this trend can be found in many examples that we can think of. And this is the World Economic Forum, so not maybe the most progressive environmental institution. Now you may be wondering why I'm naming so many negative consequences of digitalization. But as I said, I don't want to say digitalization only has good sides, but I think, and that's my second argument, There are many people and organizations around the world that are achieving very exciting things with digitalization, and we should also look out for these opportunities. I would like to highlight 3 positive application scenarios that I believe are areas of opportunity, specifically in the realm of industry. A first positive vision of digitalization is its potential to promote renewable energies through A, making the grid more flexible in the sense of the smart grid, and B, increasing the access to information on the opportunities of renewable energies. Regarding the first aspect, the smart grid, industrial companies can use demand management systems to use energy when there is a particularly large amount of renewable energies available. Millions of decentralized feed-ins of energy into the grid by consumers and other players can be managed effectively through digital technologies. Surplus energy can also temporarily be stored in batteries or alternative energy carriers in order to further reduce the dependence on fossil fuels. Regarding my second point, the access to information on renewable energies, a Google project called Project Sunroof offers the possibility of making personalized estimates of the solar energy capacity of one's own roof based on Google Earth imagery, roof shape, and weather data. The tool provides an estimate of the recommended number of solar panels and the expected savings. Finally, you can even get financing and purchasing options. Of course, we're still talking about Google here, and Google's primary goal, of course, is to make money. But I think a promising application of digital technologies nonetheless. A second positive vision of digitalization is its potential to contribute to closing material cycles, thus enabling the further proliferation of the circular economy. Numerous pieces of EU environmental legislation, such as the EU's Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, the far right-hand side, require better tracking of data to prove compliant behavior. Digital product passports, in particular, are supposed to provide information on which materials are contained in products and services and how their use can be reduced, and these materials can be reused in the circular economy. And of course, as you can imagine, international cooperation is crucial in industrial value chains that are spread across the globe. So we sometimes think that countries are not very helpful in achieving sustainability goals, such as China and Brazil, depending on the current political situation. But they sometimes appear to have a greater capacity for digital environmental cooperation than some European countries. In a study by my colleagues, Bayat, for example, they show that 26% and 32% of Brazilian and Chinese companies surveyed, respectively, had already partially automated the sharing of environmental data, compared to only 16% of the German companies. So substantially stronger drive towards the digitalization of environmental data. And such data sharing, I believe, will be essential for the circular economy going forward. As we found in another study, an interview study in the electronics sector, companies may have 10,000s of suppliers, and some of the interviewed companies already worked with these suppliers on online sustainability platforms where data was collected and analyzed, and such data can then be expanded, let's say by satellite data or by data scraped from the web on the websites of the companies to find out about their sustainability performance. Based on this data, sustainability risk assessments can be carried out. So companies can make a more informed choice about with whom to collaborate. Suppliers can then ideally also be supported with training if they're at risk of sustainability problems. Of course, it is clear that we are not immune to the problem of misinformation being fed into these systems. But one advantage is that violations of sustainability rules can be detected more quickly, for instance, using satellite pictures to detect deforestation. And information reported by employees on the ground in the producer countries or in countries around the world could potentially use their smartphones to submit and report sustainability breaches. Again, I think a positive vision that could be a promising way of thinking about digital technologies. This brings me to the third broader aspect that I think digitalization will play a major role for in the sustainability debate around the world. When we hear the term sustainable development, the World Bank and other international institutions still often refer to so-called manufacturing-led development, which means that all countries are supposed to build up a strong industry sector. This is reflected in Sustainable Development Goal number 9 of sustainable industrialization. The SDG is also the primary SDG that specifically refers to digitalization. Namely, it strives to increase access to ICT and the internet, especially in the, what they say, least developed nations. But there is a problem with that SDG. In view of what you see here, stagnating or only slightly increasing percentages of the workforce being employed in manufacturing in regions like Sub-Saharan Africa, Middle East, and North Africa in particular, it is unclear how the promise of prosperity through industrial development is to be realized in the future. On the one hand, such industry-driven development visions propagate a problematic image of development, at least from an ecological perspective, as we are already overstepping numerous planetary boundaries, and it is unclear how sustainable industrialization would actually look like. On the other hand, it also becomes less and less likely for many countries around the world to achieve industrial development with strong competition, especially from East and South Asia, China, and with increasing automation and developments of AI. So where should all the work in manufacturing come from? What can be done? I think we must think of alternative ways to increase well-being within planetary boundaries. The digital sector raises hopes that jobs with relatively lower environmental intensity could be created. In Europe, more and more people are employed in the service sector, as can be seen here in the example of Belgium. This so-called tertiarization, the rise of the services sector compared to the industrial and agriculture sector, raises hopes of a leapfrogging of many countries in the global south in which they can skip environmentally intensive industrialization development paths. Regarding emission intensity, the information and communication sector is indeed among the less carbon intensive sectors if calculated in terms of value added. For example, in comparison to the chemical sector. So this would mean that if the digital sector grows in relation to the chemical sector, emissions would fall for the same amount of monetary value added, at least in theory. I'm sorry, I skipped again. But does that mean that the digital sector is an environmentally friendly sector and that we should all start to manufacture semiconductors? Unfortunately, it is not quite that simple because it is still impossible to foresee the economic adjustment processes that would take place if industrial policy in the global south was mainly about switching to environmentally less intensive sectors, to less environmentally intensive sectors, such as business services, education, digital programming in the digital sectors, recycling, arts. So these could all be considered environmentally less intensive sectors. Can these sectors exist independently from industrialization processes and heavy industry? I think this argument brings us a bit far, but we can think of digitalization as, in some ways, a new way of thinking about these questions. I suggest we should ask the question of how can we come closer to the goal of living within planetary boundaries, and what role could digitalization play in this quest? Which economic sectors and types of value creation can make a relatively greater contribution to achieving environmental goals and enabling the well-being of our people within planetary boundaries? And my hypothesis is that digitalization will have to play a crucial role in this quest. So now this brings me to my third and final point. We design digitalization. We are in the right place to shape sustainable ICT. I said we design digitalization, and what do I mean by that? There are good examples of how digital technologies can be used for sustainability, but it is also true that we're still underutilizing their transformative potential, and that often their use in socially environmentally non-beneficial ways still predominates. We are in the right time and place, though, to shape a more sustainable and greener digitalization. And the good news is that we already have much of what we need to do this, to make this a reality. And I think, for instance, the amount of resources available to us to inform about sustainable digitalization is almost endless. AI or machine learning, more specifically maybe in this case, can, for example, help us to summarize the results of thousands of studies in easily digestible texts and communicate the existing knowledge to different target groups in an understandable way. So what are we still missing for sustainable ICT if it's not the knowledge side of things? I'm convinced that it is rather practical action that is keeping us from sustainable ICT. And what do I mean by practical action? I don't mean that everyone has to build their own digital tools like this painting robot. My approach is rather that we as researchers or civil society should seek greater dialogue and cooperation with industry and politics in order to jointly strengthen the positive tendencies of digitalization and weaken its negative impacts. In my own work, I do this through transdisciplinary research projects where, for example, we work with industry and politics to create a practical guide to familiarize industrial companies with direct and indirect environmental effects of ICT and help them to implement greener ICT. I believe that there are already a lot of great resources and guides available, such as the software sustainability awareness framework, or the tarot cards of tech, or organizations and initiatives like Climate Tech, Tech for Good initiatives, the Green Software Foundation, the Green Web Foundation, Green Coding Berlin, and many, many others that are providing insights and also providing practical guides for us to implement more sustainable ICT. But it really comes down to making people use these tools and also understand the importance of this topic. Another aspect that I would like to mention here at the end, towards the end of my talk, there's immense potential of digital technologies to network in order to highlight the scope of action and stimulate action in industry and politics. One example of this, I think, networking capacity or how digital technologies can help us to network is the example of the CODES stakeholder mapping. The CODES is the UNEP's Coalition for Digital Environmental Sustainability, which can help people to find like-minded stakeholders for more sustainable digitalization. And of course, we have also come here today to work together on sustainable ICT. And I think we wouldn't have come here together if it wasn't for digital technologies that also enabled us to find information about this event. And we should think of how digital technologies can help us to build the alliances and and find the synergies to really make more sustainable ICT happen. To summarize my key points. First, I think digitalization poses major risk for the environment, but not everything is lost. There are promising fields of application for digital technologies for environmental protection. And third, it is up to us to shape digitalization in such a way that its negative impacts are reduced and that it contributes to solving our sustainability challenges. We design digitalization. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you a lot for a very nice presentation with a hopeful message at the end. My question is more regarding the role of industry and business, because those are people I work with a lot. Do you believe that this positive take can also arise from industry itself? And maybe more specific, how do you see the role of policy within this transformation of the digitalization of industry towards a sustainable digitalization of industry? Yeah.
Thanks. The project that I'm currently part of is a government-funded project. It's funded by the German Ministry for the Economy and Climate Protection. And they fund projects that pay both into the green and the digital agenda. It's called the Green Tech Innovation Competition. And I believe that the current point of view, and you're closer to that than anybody else in Europe, I think that the current political movement is towards the green and the digital transformation in Brussels and around Europe. So they really want to further both agendas, but my feeling is that the digital is stronger than the green agenda. So in this project, when we talk to the industry people, they are open to exploring the connection, but they're still very much looking at how it can be profitable. And I don't see that there's a lot of transformative action coming from the companies. And you could question whether it's a transformative or it has the project that I'm working in, this green and digital innovation competition, has any transformative potential from the side of the government. So I think the government has a stronger intention to further the green agenda. So I do think that there's a lot of people now, especially with the green minister in Germany, there's a lot of people who really want to do something for environmental protection in industry, but there's very few that would go so far as to say, okay, we have to degrow our economies, or we have to maybe think about not producing as many cars in Germany anymore. So my feeling is that the government is still in the best position to do something, but when it comes to very disruptive changes towards more sustainable ways of thinking about industry, then it's limited, I would say. But the examples I mentioned, I think, are quite high up the agenda, proliferating the circular economy and renewable energy use. So this is very much aligned with the political discussions right now. So I think that's the biggest potential.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm asking you the question that you could answer as an economist. You showed us some example of what we could call good digitalization, but what is the selection process? Because it seems that today the European Union is going for a market solution, which is the idea to have a lot of solution in competition and you will find the greener. So have you worked on that? Have you thought about how do we select what is good and what is not good? Because it's also a question of point of view. So yeah.
So you mean how you can distinguish between the good and the bad digitalization projects? Yeah, I think my point of view, but I don't know if it's shared by the people in power, would be that it has to, I mean, it has to be, it has to consider the rebound effects. And of course, the circular economy also has rebound problem because still we become more efficient and prices may go down. So you may use more of the good. And that's where the big, I suppose the big problem of digitalization lies, that it's still in the growth logic, and it will still continue to help us to consume more resources in the first place. But then the question you could ask, I think, is, does it help us towards a different paradigm, and especially with the reuse of materials, I think where it's the closest we can get to this idea of maybe we should stop the extractivism, or at least reduce the extractivism, but it's still in this technological debate. So my feeling is that the example of the circular economy is a good one because it caters to the needs of different people who want a technological solution, but it also relates a little bit to the debate around should we actually use so many new materials and where do they come from, and we need to scale down the entire production and consumption system. But yeah, as a general rule, I don't know. I guess I would put the rebound idea as a question for funding, or I would suggest the funding bodies to think about what's the possible rebounds that can come out of it. And if they can, and this starts the thinking about all the other effects that will follow. But yeah, I don't think I have a good general answer.
Thanks for your talk. I've got a question. So you discussed a little bit the negative consequences ICT can have, and some of its indirect effects. Then you also discussed some of the positive aspects that it can bring. But I had a question more on the, not directly the environmental impact of ICT, but for instance, with AI, it also enables more surveillance and more repression of ecological activists.
Yeah.
How do we account for that when we think about the environmental impacts of digitalization, for instance?
I suppose I largely didn't talk about the social effects, which I think is, of course, a big topic to think about. I just find it difficult to balance or put weigh these effects against each other, or to think about it in terms of, okay, this is the good thing, and then there's the environmental surveillance. I think it will all exist at the same time, and my current take is that it's probably 95 or 99% of negative or environmentally negative applications of AI, and then 1% that's good, that can be considered as positive for the environment. So it's more about pushing against the negative applications and in favor of the positive ones. And with regard to the surveillance, I do think that we can somehow separate the mass surveillance aspect and the potential environmental benefits side. at least from a technical point of view, but maybe there are people in the audience who know better than me, you can have anonymized anonymized data that you could potentially use for the analysis of environmental problems, and thus overcome the problem of individually surveilling people. So it doesn't have to go hand in hand. But of course, it's a negative implication of the use of these technologies, but it's not necessarily linked. Any other questions?
Yeah. Sorry. So when you're talking about good digitalization, you mentioned a lot of like the use of data, and I have two reservations about that, and I would like to have your thoughts on it.
Yeah.
One is actually we live very close to like dystopian world of surveillance, so like having more data. Yeah, maybe it can be used for the greater good, but we do know that most of the time it's not used for that for different reasons. And the second thing, I actually don't think a lot of problem that we have, I don't think because we have a lack of data, but more because we do not know, or like we as like companies or academia or whatever, we don't have the resources to actually analyze the data effectively. And this is why, and even when it comes to privacy, it's not like the police that don't have data. They do like to have more data, but the problem actually of like why they don't catch the criminals is because they just don't have the resources to analyze the data. And I assume it's the same when it comes to sustainability, or like how do we use the data for different projects when it comes to sustainability. So I don't know if you have thoughts on that. Thank you.
So the aspect of surveillance, if I understand you correctly, it's a bit similar to. Maybe you could ask the first question again. Okay, that was just general. Okay. Well, I think when we talk to my impression from talking to some of the industry representatives in our project is that it's very hard for them to imagine that you can address a problem without data. So maybe it's a way of looking at the world. The most cited quote that I see in these presentations is that you can't improve what you can't measure. And I really don't like it, because if I know that I'm doing something wrong, I mean, I can still improve it even if I don't know how wrong it is, or how much damage I create. But I think it's a logic that is very deeply enshrined in let's say the company's management and among the employees. So we have to deal with that. And if they think they don't have the data, maybe a pragmatic approach could be to let them collect the data and analyze it and deal with it in their way. But I agree with you that I think we have a lot of information about A, environmental degradation, and B, what we can do about it. So I think sometimes we may also, or we should be wary that these arguments are not being used just to delay action. But yes, I think in certain contexts, when it comes to supply chains, and you ask the company, what's your environmental impact in the supply chain? They will say, I don't know. But now that there's a reporting directive from the EU, I will have to find out. So I'll ask my suppliers, where is the environmental damage happening? And maybe they could have known that earlier, but they weren't really interested, because it's also, I mean, not very good for them to know about all the bad things that are happening in the supply chain. So now they're collecting this data, and maybe in the way that the industry works, they can now start to improve their performance and have the KPI, and then it goes up or down, or whatever their goal is. And I think in that way it's good, but we still, I mean, especially when it comes to the surveillance of employees in the supply chain, there was an interesting example of a company that said, we can now find out when people are having their toilet break, because we see that the energy use in the factory goes down. And they were excited about it, because then they can tell people, oh, you shouldn't be on the toilet for so long. So basically that would be a nice example of a bad social consequence. and I guess we have to make politicians aware of these consequences and help the employees to, take action or to basically ban such applications of digital technologies. But yeah, I basically agree with you, but it's a different, sometimes I feel it's a bit of a different logic.
Thank you very much for the nice talk. I liked it a lot. I'm wondering about the first argument that you made. If the last aspect, so we know what are the risks of digitalization, and because we know them, we can entail them. I'm wondering if we are in a position at the legal, or we have the legal framework and the political framework to actually limit those risks, given the market forces that are in place at the world level, and the fact that most of the digital technologies are not really originating from Europe, but Europe is just like trying to copy or to stay close to the state of the art, or replicating what's happening in Asia or in US. So if we just assume that there are good usages of ICT and bad usages, do we have a way to actually arbitrate at the legal level and at the political level for fostering the right ones and trying to prohibit the other one? And if it's not the case, what do we miss to have this framework that would allow such an arbitration?
My understanding is that there are a lot of people working on exactly those cost-benefit analyses, trying to, maybe some of you have been to ICT4S, and there's a group of people who's trying to calculate the indirect effects and then also try to see how this could be implemented in a standard and have a clear idea of how to measure the direct environmental impacts of digital technologies and the indirect. And I think Jan Bisa is also going to talk a little bit about the visions of how digital technologies can potentially reduce emissions and other environmental impacts in the future. So that would be part of such a calculation, right? But I think it's just too difficult to really make a solid statement about the abatement potential of digital technologies, because there are so many assumptions in how the economy and the society will react to the technologies that it's probably impossible to give a quantitative estimate of the net benefit of the digital technology. So my feeling is that although we can try to find such a distinction between the good and the bad technology, it will ultimately not have a scientific basis or a quantitative scientific basis. For me, it would rather be a qualitative assessment, and it would include a large group of stakeholders that discuss about the potential effects, and then try to, there's also a few workshop procedures that you can use to work with technology developers, and then they are supposed to assess which effects are going to arise and how important they may be. So rather on this qualitative scale, on a qualitative scale, assess their potential impact, and based on that, make improvements to the technology development in the technology development process. So I think that's a more realistic way of going forward. And when it comes to the policy making, I think it will be extremely difficult to work with, let's say, a liberal party like the FDP in Germany, the Free Democratic Party, if I'm not mistaken, who say, okay, we have to be open to all kinds of technologies. I don't think there will be a political majority to such a framework. But I think, maybe as a last sentence about this, I think the people who really have these thoughts, can we have a net assessment of the technology, maybe looking 20 years in the future? Will it help us? And it's also some kind of what we call in German Technikfolgenabschätzung, like the consequences of the technology, and it's being done, but I think it's not really put into one coherent paragraph, and then you can do it.
Thanks a lot. I find this super exciting because you also at the beginning of your talk, you had this conjecture that the impact of ICT is not as dramatic as, for example, that of the chemical sector or something like that, and that there are supposedly benefits of deploying ICT in other industry sectors, which is then again based on these ICTs performing optimizations, right? Process optimizations. But
Right.
if we look at those sectors in industrialized nations, we actually see that those sectors are heavily digitalized already. So you don't find many chemical processes that are not optimized by digital technologies. And now your final statement, I think in combination with that is super exciting because it indicates to me that as a society, we seem to be demanding evidence, demanding data and scientific results when it's about reducing something. But when it's about the deployment of new technologies, we are totally fine with anecdotal evidence or not even anecdotal evidence. We conjecture that there might be a saving and that is enough of a justification to deploy something. So I'm really wondering, like, how can we work with those narratives? Are there better narratives that help us? I mean, if we know that we have to reduce impacts by, I don't know, 50%, 75% of emissions, we can basically just start switching things off. We don't have to measure anymore, right?
Yeah.
So how can we construct narratives that actually work and that are not FDP narratives?
It's a difficult question. I think we're going to solve it together today or maybe in the course of the week. My feeling is that we should use the enthusiasm that people have about digital technologies and somehow make it a strength, even if it may be difficult sometimes to believe in the positive narratives that are being put forward by some of the industry actors. So, as I said, I think we have this immense challenge of dramatically reducing the human impact on the environment, and also then at the same time solving the entire or the big amount of social problems and of inequality around the globe and so on. So we don't actually know if that can be done. I mean, I think there's some papers, but I don't know exactly what they suggest we should do, but they say a life within planetary boundaries, a good life for all is possible. So I think there's some people who say that, but I'm not so sure if we really know how that would look like. If we consider that it's not so easy to redistribute the wealth from the global north to the global south, so just from the political economy side. And yeah, I think then what can digital technologies do? They can make people think of new ways of how people achieve great innovation in some ways. Of course, it's not always environmental innovation or socially desirable, but it sparks this idea of we can really transform. So this is one thing that I would like to weave into that narrative. And the second aspect really is that from this as of my argument about the chemical sector, it's of course not really clear how the world would look like if we didn't have all the heavy industry and we had just would not produce cars anymore, and not maybe heavy buildings, but we would live in a digital society that where we basically share everything, and the only carbon intensive tool would be our smartphone. We don't need anything else. I don't know if that's possible, but at least it is a way of imagining a different future. So that would be my way of thinking about it. Okay, we don't have any other good ideas of how this entire industry can be made sustainable, or at least from what I know, we don't really know how to make heavy industry sustainable. We know how to make it a bit more efficient, but it's still super unsustainable. So maybe, yeah, get away from that and try to see different ways of creating value. But if digital technologies will play a role in this, of course, it shouldn't be preset. I don't want to say digital technologies will be a part of this future for sure, but my feeling is that they would probably rather be a part of it than not be a part of it. Any other questions?
Thank you for your presentation. I want to know what you put behind the we, because I'm certainly biased, but every time I see a positive example of AI usage, for example, it's always coming from an NGO, from activists or researchers. Like, for example, of course, you have great usage of AI to analyze climate change and how it will affect our lives. For example, you have the carbon bombs, you have many projects about how we could do better that comes from AI. But do you have counter example of this, like positive usage of AI that come from the industry that have a concrete positive impact or a concrete positive potential coming from this side? And also, do you have insights on AI and ICT absorbing, let's say, economic resources from projects that could be positive elsewhere?
I don't know about the second. Maybe I can find an example of that too. But I would say the positive examples from the industry, I would draw from the project that I'm working in now. So some of the applications they're thinking of is you simulate a prototype and you do the prototype testing through the simulation, and you don't have to actually build a prototype and let it run 10,000 times. So they, in this specific case, they use it for a machine pump, and they basically have this online model of how the pump will react to the use, and then they can simulate that you have it in your home for 5 years, and how likely it is that it will break, and their assumed goal or what stated objective is that you can expand the use time of the washing machine, because you know how the pump will react to being used. So that would be an industry example, but of course a small one. And I think another one is that is sometimes put forward is that the efficiency achievements in data centers were also realized through, I think, Google and other companies' engineers who were basically finding new ways of storing and transmitting data in these hyperscalers. I'm not an expert on that, but I think the key point is that they say if we hadn't achieved those technology-driven efficiency improvements in the data centers, then the energy use of data centers would have gone up much more. So this is the narrative. The problem, or the maybe paradox there, is that, of course, if the efficiency of the data centers hadn't gone up that much, maybe we wouldn't use so much data. Maybe the applications that we run in data centers today and that AI techniques that we've developed wouldn't have been developed if the data centers wouldn't have become so efficient. So it's a bit of a hen and egg problem. I think the industry tries to use AI technology to become more efficient, and they want to be more energy efficient, maybe in some cases to save energy, but they don't really realize that their own efficiency improvements will then lead to an uptake of the services, or maybe they ignore it and they will just say, okay, we become more efficient and then we'll be more sustainable. But of course, yeah, I think this is not always true. And that's why, yeah, I think the we should be wary of the narrative, or we should be very cautious about the positive AI narratives by the industry, but there are some. That's what I think.
So you put everyone involved in ICT behind the wheel, to go back to my first question.
You mean put behind the wheels, like who should develop these technologies?
When you say we design and we can have a positive impact, you think it's as a whole, ICT ecosystem as a whole?
Yeah. Well, I suppose that from my point of view, it seems that the current problem is that there's not enough capacity in the public sector to develop digital technologies for the public good. In Germany, we have a lot of projects now where they try to involve different actors to develop AI for good. And they invite stakeholders from society to come to the ministry and then work together with developers to create AI systems for good, because they want to, harness this potential. But then it's difficult to scale the solutions because you don't have you cannot reach out to enough people to use it, or not enough people know about it. And maybe you don't have the technical infrastructure to implement it at large scale. So this is where it seems to me that the big players and the companies come in and have to really use these technologies. But it could be, as I think it is often currently done, it could be a partnership. So the government supports the company to develop an environmentally friendly application of AI. And then there's also some kind of maybe requirement for it to be open source, so everyone could potentially then use it. But yeah, I'm a bit, I would like the government and the public sector to be able to do it on their own, but I think it's difficult for them in terms of capacity.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. Maybe we take a last question, or we end up here because we had many questions. Okay, last one.
Yeah, please.
Okay, thank you for your talk. And I just have a remark, here you write stay positive, work hard, and make it happen. Do you really think in this work hard, is it something you think we should continue to do, or do you think we should do completely the opposite and stop working hard and stop a bit this progress and kind of race with the industry to produce greener technologies or not? Because actually we could argue that nothing is completely green as soon as we produce something is not green. So yeah, just continue this race and rushing, even if it is kind of a green KPI, is it good to continue this kind of race and rushing to more and more new technologies, or just kind of stop this race to progress? And yeah, I mean, that's kind of a remark. I don't know what you think about this, and if we should continue to work hard or do completely the opposite.
Yeah. I mean, I've never really reflected so much on this picture. Yeah, that's true. Maybe we shouldn't work that hard. I agree with you that it's really a cat and mouse game, and we, in some ways, we put fuel in the fire, or I don't know if that's a good way of putting it. But also, I mean, you could reinterpret what do you think work hard means. I think for me, work hard would not necessarily mean you develop better technology than the others, or you develop more sustainable technology, but it could also be you try to see the good initiatives that are already out there, and then you support these initiatives, and you could do that in various ways. So if, let's say, everyone has to make the decision on their own how to support this transformative change, and for one person it is, I produce the organic vegetables in my garden that I can sell to the people who want to continue working in the tech space. I think that that's perfectly fine. I don't want to, presuppose that technology is part of the solution, but it's rather if you decide my feeling is that if you decide to work with in that field, sustainable ICT, it's really hard to get out of to step out of the wheel and just say, okay, I'm not going to deal with you anymore. You kind of have to play by their rules in some ways. So yeah, I think both it's absolutely good, and I think it may be really helpful to just stop working, but in some ways it also won't have an impact on many people. So, but maybe they will be inspired and then will also stop working.
I think it's a nice word to to stop the debate and slow down. So
Thank
now,
you.
yeah. Thank you,
Thank you very much.
Stefanie.